Nominal versus real GDP. Now let's take an example of this beautiful tiny land, and this tiny land produces only two goods, apples and oranges. Now this tiny land has produced apples and oranges in the year 2016, and it has also produced apples and oranges in the year 2017. If I ask you, what is the value of the goods and services that this tiny land produced in 2016, you will tell me that, look, this tiny land is producing 180 units of apple in 2016, and each apple is worth $0.80. So the total value of apples that it is producing is 180 into 0.80. This is the total value of apples produced. Okay. Then I ask you, what is the value of oranges produced in this country? So you will tell me that, 140 oranges were being produced in 2016, and the oranges were being produced at a rate of $1.80. So in that sense, if we have to go ahead and calculate 140 oranges, each orange at a rate of 1.80, you can multiply this together and get the value of oranges. You add the value of oranges and apples together, and you get the total value of the goods produced by this teeny tiny land. So this thing that I'm just doing basically is normally the GDP of the country. I'm not telling you what nominal is, what real is for now. Just hold on that for a second. But we just want to understand what is the value of goods that are being produced in the country. So to understand the value of the goods that are being produced in the country, we are just going ahead and multiplying. Just avoid the word nominal for a while and just focus on the word GDP for now. So to find the GDP of the country, it is nothing but the value of goods and services. What is the value of anything? Its price into its quantity. So, if you tell me that there are 100 cars in a country and each car is worth 7 lakh rupees, well, woo, this is my GDP of the country. If you tell me my country is producing 500 books and it is able to sell each book for 100 rupees, then wow, this is the amount that I'm earning from books. Similarly, if you tell me my country is producing 1,000 mobiles and each mobile is being sold for 25,000, then great enough. This is what my country is earning from mobiles. Now, if I ask you what is the total amount my country is earning, then that would actually be this plus this plus this, right? So if I go back to my teeny tiny land, ideally find out what is the value of GDP. In 2016, you tell me the price of apples in 2016 into the quantity of apples produced in 2016. This is the value of apples in 2016 plus the price of oranges in 2016 into the quantity of oranges in 2016. This is the value of oranges in 2016. You add these two and you get the GDP of my country in 2016. Now, I go ahead and introduce a term which is known as nominal GDP. Nominal GDP is basically always calculated at current prices. Always. So whenever you calculate your GDP at current price, that is known as nominal GDP. Against that, my real GDP. is basically the value of goods and services at the base price. Now, one question that may arise right now is, why do you want to calculate something at a base price? And what is base price for that matter? So basically what really happens in any economy is that a lot of times we want to hold prices constant. Why? Why do I want to hold prices constant? So that I can purely focus on my quantity and try and understand what happens with the quantity in my economy. Just try and think about this, okay? So for example, I tell you that the price of apple is $1 and the price of orange, and I'm talking about 2016, is $2. And I was able to sell 100 units of apple and 200 units of oranges. If I ask you what is the GDP of my country, you will tell me 1 into 100 plus 2 into 200, and this would become $500. All right. Now, supposedly I ask you what happened. Supposedly in 2017, the price of apple has increased from $1 to maybe $3. This is the price of apple. Now, because the price of apple increased, people became a little adamant on buying apples. And actually that year, we were only able to sell 80 apples. All right. And the price of oranges actually went ahead from, let's say, $2 to, let's say, $1. It decreased. I don't know due to what reason, but it decreased. And when it decreased, the quantity of oranges actually had seen a huge shoot up, and it went all the way from $200 to, let's say, $300, 300 units. If I ask you what is the GDP of this country, then one way that you will calculate the GDP is you will tell me the value of apples plus the value of oranges. And this would be 3 into 80 plus 1 into 300. And this would be 240 plus 300, which would be 540. So good enough, right? The value of GDP shoot up from 500 to 540. There is an increase in GDP. But now supposedly I ask you, is this increase in GDP because the price of apples increased? Or is this increase in GDP actually because we progressed and we produced more? What's the reason behind increase in GDP? Now, just by looking at the value 540 and 500, a layman may just simply say that, we went from 500 to 540, GDP has increased. But what is the reason behind this increase in GDP? Is it due to increase in quantity? Or is it simply because prices increased and there was huge amount of inflation? So the value of output increased, but the quantity didn't increase. And hence it wasn't really progressive in the real sense. Now to check that, you will say that, okay, what we can do is we can hold prices constant at the earlier price. And if I hold prices constant at 1 and 2, then I have a price of $1 here and I have a price of $2 here. And now let's try and see what GDP would be. And GDP would be 80 plus 600, which would be 680. So 150%, if I hold the prices constant at 1, 2, Then also GDP is shooting up from 500 to 580. So in fact, the only thing that is changing in this case, when I've held prices constant and GDP is still increasing, the only thing that is increasing is output. So 150%, we can say that there is an increase in the production even when prices are held constant. To do that, we calculate something which is known as real GDP. So ideally, what is real GDP then? Real GDP helps us calculate the value of the output at base prices, and hence an increase in real GDP is only due to increase in production. Since real GDP is P into Q, where P is kept constant. So if real GDP increases, it's like this. P is kept constant at a price of 2016. And this P is multiplied by different quantities. So, if there is an increase here, then it is solely because the quantity in 2017 is greater than the quantity in 2016. Is this making sense? Now let's go back to our teeny tiny land and see the same thing. In our teeny tiny land, to find the GDP of 2016, we go ahead and multiply the price with the quantity plus the price with the quantity, and we get nominal GDP of 2016. Similarly, if I have to calculate the real GDP of 2016, then real GDP will also be, because for 2016, the base year and the current year are both 2016. That's the same year, right? Therefore, nominal GDP or real GDP would mean the same thing here. So that is what I have done here. Again, price into quantity plus price into quantity. So this will be 0.80 into 180 plus 1.80 into 140. And this will give me my real GDP. Now let's calculate what will be the nominal GDP in 2017. So for 2017, if it is nominal GDP, it will be at its current price. So price into quantity plus price into quantity. So 1 into 200 plus 2 into 150, which is 500. Remember, here I have price at the current year price. Quantity is definitely current year, and that is getting summed up for different commodities. Here, when I find the real GDP of 2017, then to find the real GDP of 2017, I have to go ahead and take quantity of the current year, because I just have to see what's the change in the quantity, right? Real GDP just helps me understand if quantity has increased or not. So quantity of the current year, but the prices will be of the base year. So price of apple in the base year is 0.80 multiplied by the quantity in the current year. Price of apple will be, orange will be 1.80 multiplied by the quantity in the current year. So ideally, the formula for real GDP is price of the base year, quantity of the current year, and after multiplying those, you add it for different commodities. For the first commodity, you found out PB into QC. For the second commodity, you did the same. For the third commodity, you did the same, and so on. Now, once you have done that, I ask you, what is the nominal GDP growth? So growth rate in GDP is always calculated as GDP in the current year minus GDP in the base year upon GDP in the base year into 100. So GDP in the current year is 500 minus GDP in the base year is 396 upon GDP in the base year is 396 into 100. So this gives you 26%. So 26% GDP that is increased. This increase can be due to increase in prices. Do you see the prices have increased from 0.80 to 1 and 1.80 to 2. So it can be due to price increase or it can be due to quantity increase. Any, just remember this, any increase, both, actually not any, both these increases together have caused GDP to increase by 26%. Now, if I ask you what is the real GDP growth rate, then GDP, real GDP in the current year is 430. Real GDP in the base year is 396 upon base year is 396 into 100, and this gives you 8.6%. So basically this is solely a change in production because we have held prices constant. Do you see this? That if I talk about the prices in the 2 year while calculating real GDP, this is 0.80, 0.80, 1.80, 1.80. So for the real GDP, the prices have been held constant. The only factor that changed is the quantity. This was 2016 quantity, this is 2017 quantity. 2016 quantity, 2017 quantity. So this growth rate that we have is solely due to output or solely due to production, but no part of inflation or no part of price change has been included. This is actual representative of actual production growth, whereas this nominal GDP, because we are considering both prices and output changes, that's not a true representation of GDP. So do you see, I've included the price changes 0.80 to 1, 1.80 to 2, and then we have also included the output changes. So we are not sure as to what this 26% represents, how much of it is due to inflation and how much of it is due to output. Now, after this, what we should be understanding is the following. There are two things that we have understood. One is called a nominal GDP. And the other is known as the real GDP. Real GDP solely tells us changes due to quantity. Nominal GDP defines both quantity plus price, both changes. If I go ahead and I divide nominal GDP by real GDP and multiply it by 100, so just try and understand this thing. It's very easy to understand. So, nominal GDP by real GDP into 100. Okay, nominal is showing me changes which are either due to price or quantity. Real is showing me changes solely due to quantity. Into 100, ideally dividing the two will only show me the increase in price, the percentage increase in price. So actually speaking, GDP deflator, as the word suggests, deflate, change. GDP deflator is nothing, but it basically tells us how much inflation has come in the economy. We can do the other way around also. If somebody tells me what is the GDP deflator and nominal GDP, I can rewrite this formula and calculate real GDP. That's also possible, right? So GDP deflator basically tells us how much would be the inflation in my economy. Ideally, supposedly here, if I'm getting my GDP deflator as 116.3, then the inflation in my economy is approximately 11%. So, inflation in my economy is 116.3 minus 100, which is approximately, 16.3%. This is the amount of inflation in my economy. Okay. Let's do a short question on the same. Now, supposedly this is the question that is given to you. The nominal GDP is given at 50 billion. And let's say that, it says that the growth rate of GDP is 7.5% from 2012 to 2018. And now let's say that nominal GDP, the GDP deflator is given at 123. First of all, if I have to ask what is the nominal GDP in 2018, the nominal GDP in 2018 will be the GDP in 2012 multiplied by the rate at which it grew. Just try and understand this thing. See, nominal GDP has grown at the rate of 7.5%. This is what it is telling us, 7.5%. And it is telling us that this is an annualized rate. Annualized rate means what? Every year. So supposedly it's like this. Supposedly you make an FD of 100 rupees. And let's say that the rate is 10%. Then after 1 year, you will get 100 plus 10% on 100. So you will get 110. Then after 2 years, you will get 100 and, you would have got 100 plus 10% after 1 year and 10% after 2 years, right? So you would have got 10% more, but after 2 years. Just try and understand this thing. So, this would have been 10% for 2 years, something like that, right? So you would have directly got 10% for 2 years. You would have got back your 100. Plus you would have got this interest rate after 2 years. So it would have been 100 upon 10 upon 100 to the power 2 into 100. Supposedly I ask you what happens if you get it after 3 years. Then you would have told me that after 3 years, it would have been 100. Whatever my principal amount is. Plus I will get back interest on this principal amount. But interest would be multiplied to the power 3. I'm getting it for 3 years. So I can take 100 common and then it would be 1 upon 10 by 100 to the power 3. Right? So if I ask you what do you get after 7 years, then it would be simple. Right? Now this is exactly what I am going to do here. So for example, let's say that this is the question. I am getting 7.5% after, this is the growth rate every year. Every year it is growing by 7.5%. This is the annual growth rate. So if you ask me how do I calculate this, it is simple. It would be initial into 1 plus whatever is the growth rate, 7.5 upon 100 to the power 6. So this would be 50 into 1 plus, what is this? This is nothing but 0.075 to the power 6. Whole to the power 6, sorry. Right? Simple. P 1 plus R to the power T.